He betrayed me for attention. I let his double life collapse publicly. At first, it was just little things. A shift in the way he looked at his phone when he thought I wasn't paying attention. A slight edge to his voice when I asked simple questions. A hunger in his smile. Not for me, but for something else, something outside our life together. I told myself it was nothing. That work had been stressful. That relationships go through seasons, some quieter, some harder. But deep down, I knew better. You don't notice cracks unless something underneath the surface has already started to break. Nathan, my boyfriend of nearly 3 years, had always been a little performative. The right photo at the right angle. The carefully curated captions. The constant need to be seen and admired. At first, I had found it charming. His energy, his ambition, his ability to light up a room without even trying. But somewhere along the way, it had shifted. He wasn't shining anymore. He was reaching, grasping for something just out of frame. Attention, validation, admiration. Something he had decided I alone couldn't give him. I noticed it at a dinner with friends one night. The way he leaned just a little too far into the laughter of a woman he barely knew. The way he smiled wider at compliments that had nothing to do with who he really was. It wasn't about temptation. It wasn't even about connection. It was about the thrill of being desired. The ego boost of knowing he could still draw eyes across a crowded room. And for the first time, I saw the difference. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about him. Him, and the world he wanted to orbit him. Bright and adoring. Never asking for anything deeper than what he was willing to give. That night, driving home in silence, I realized something I couldn't ignore. Nathan wasn't building a future with me. He was building a stage for himself. And he didn't care who he hurt along the way. As long as the applause was loud enough. Once you start questioning one thing, you start questioning everything. I found myself replaying conversations in my mind. Late nights he claimed were spent at the office. Texts he answered too quickly, too defensively. Weekend plans canceled at the last minute with flimsy explanations. At the time I had believed him. Not because his excuses were convincing, but because I wanted to believe them. Because the alternative, that the man I loved was living a life outside of the one we shared, was too painful to consider without proof. But now that the seed of doubt had taken root, it was impossible to ignore. There were the parties he attended without inviting me, brushed off as networking events where plus ones would be a distraction. There were the moments when I caught him scrolling through social media, liking photos and leaving comments on posts that had nothing to do with work or friendship. The way he spoke about certain women, always with a detached admiration, as if they were characters in a story he was writing for an invisible audience. And the way he stopped asking me about my day, stopped caring about the little things that once mattered, the projects I was proud of, the books I was reading, the small triumphs that had once been cause for celebration between us. It was as if the real me had become too ordinary to hold his attention anymore. He needed a version of life that sparkled, that shimmered under the right lighting, that made him feel larger than he was. And somewhere along the way, I had become just another backdrop to the story he was trying to tell. The realization didn't come in a dramatic moment. It wasn't one big betrayal that shattered everything at once. It was quieter than that. It was the accumulation of small dismissals, small lies, small moments of indifference, that built up until the weight of them became impossible to carry. Nathan wasn't just slipping away. He was already gone. All that remained was the version of him he wanted the world to see. And I wasn't part of it anymore. The truth didn't come crashing down in some grand reveal. It slipped in through the cracks, quiet and insistent, too real to ignore once it finally found its way in. It happened one evening when Nathan left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. A simple accident, nothing dramatic. He had been working late, or so he said, and had stepped out to take a call. I hadn't gone looking. I hadn't even intended to glance at the screen. But a notification popped up. A private message from a woman I didn't recognize, accompanied by a photo that left no room for innocent interpretations. I froze. Heart pounding, stomach sinking, mind racing. The message wasn't explicit. Not in the way people expect when they think about cheating. It was worse than that. It was casual. Familiar. A conversation midstream. The kind of easy back and forth you only have with someone who knows your rhythms, your humor, your private jokes. I clicked, almost against my will. And there it was. A web of messages. Photos. Inside jokes. References to dinners and drinks I had never been told about. Late-night conversations that had unfolded while I had been asleep, trusting him to simply be who he said he was. But it wasn't just one woman. It was 2, 3, each with a different version of Nathan. each with the same flattering attention he used to make them feel seen, special, chosen. And all the while, he came home to me, pretended to build a life with me, made promises he had no intention of keeping. It wasn't an affair in the traditional sense. There were no secret hotel rooms, no lipstick on collars. It was something more insidious. A need for constant validation. A hunger to be everything to everyone, even if it meant being nothing real to anyone at all. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a pattern. A second life carefully curated, designed for admiration, with no space left for truth. And for the first time, I stopped feeling confused. I saw him clearly, maybe for the first time. After that night, everything between us changed. At least, for me it did. Nathan moved through the world as if nothing had shifted. He still texted me good morning, still kissed my forehead on his way out the door, still spoke about the future in broad, shining strokes, as if there was still one waiting for us. And I let him. I nodded at the right moments. I smiled when he reached for my hand. I laughed at jokes that barely touched me anymore. On the surface, I was the same, but underneath, something had splintered clean through. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something then that I hadn't understood before. Confrontation would only give him a stage, another performance, another chance to twist the story into something he could survive. A misunderstanding, an overreaction, an accident he never meant to happen. I wasn't interested in giving him that opportunity. I didn't need a confession to know the truth. I had already seen it, written in the easy intimacy of his conversations, the ones he thought would stay hidden behind screens and late-night secrecy. So I stayed quiet, not out of weakness, but out of strategy, because sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to let someone believe they're still winning, to let them dig their own hole deeper. With every careless lie, every reckless decision, every smile flashed a little too brightly at someone who wasn't me. While Nathan performed, I watched. I listened. I gathered. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. Because if I was going to walk away, I wasn't going to stumble out battered and broken. I was going to walk out steady, clear-eyed, holding every truth he had tried so desperately to keep hidden. And when the moment came, it wouldn't be about exposing him with anger. It would be about freeing myself with certainty. Once you stop believing the performance, it's impossible to unsee it. Nathan's life became a series of carefully choreographed moments, designed not for connection, but for admiration. Every dinner out was a photo opportunity. Every gathering a chance to position himself at the center of attention. Every casual story told just loud enough for the right people to overhear. It wasn't just about being liked. It was about being envied. About making sure the world saw him exactly the way he wanted to be seen. Successful, magnetic, desirable. Even if none of it was real. I watched from the sidelines. No longer a partner in his life, but a witness to the character he had built. He laughed louder at parties, told grander stories, dropped hints about a future full of possibilities he had no intention of sharing with anyone fully. And all the while, he gathered new admirers the way some people collect souvenirs. Small affirmations of his worth, tokens to reassure himself that he was still winning. He didn't notice the shift in me. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, too wrapped up in the applause to realize the one person who had stood by him through everything was quietly stepping back. There was a sadness to it, in a way. Watching someone so desperate to be seen, that they forgot how to be known. But any sadness I felt was quickly tempered by a deeper truth. This wasn't about me. Nathan hadn't betrayed me because I lacked something. He had betrayed me because he needed too much. No single person could ever fill the hollow spaces he refused to face. And while he performed for the world, I stayed still. I let him believe the audience was still clapping. I let him believe the story was still his to write. Because soon enough, the mask would slip, and when it did, the collapse would be no one's fault but his own. I didn't rush. There was no frantic digging through his phone, no late-night interrogations, no dramatic demands for the truth he had already given away freely without realizing it. Instead, I moved quietly, patiently. I started with what he had already shown me, the half-conversations glimpsed on his laptop, the social media comments made under the assumption that no one was really paying attention. Then I looked deeper. Alternate profiles, private message threads, posts tagged in places he swore he had never been. It didn't take much. Nathan wasn't careful, because he didn't think he needed to be. He trusted the image he had built to shield him. trusted that I would stay in the role he had assigned to me. The patient, supportive girlfriend who never questioned what she couldn't see. But I wasn't playing that part anymore. I screenshotted quietly, saved emails, collected small, tangible pieces of the life he had built parallel to ours. Not to confront him, not to force a confession he would twist into something manageable, but to have my own certainty, my own proof, when the time came to let it all fall down. Along the way, I found more than just messages. There were pictures taken with women he had called just friends, weekend trips disguised as work retreats, plans made late at night while I sat alone at home, trusting, waiting, believing in a man who had long since chosen attention over authenticity. Each discovery hurt less than the last, not because the betrayal was any smaller, but because my attachment to him was already unraveling thread by thread. By the time I finished gathering everything, there was no anger left, only clarity. Nathan wasn't my partner. He wasn't even himself anymore. He was an idea he was desperately trying to sell to the world. And the real tragedy was that he couldn't even see how much he had already lost long before the truth would ever come to light. It's easy to think you're alone when betrayal first finds you. The shame, the disbelief. They make you feel like maybe you missed something obvious. Like maybe it's your fault for trusting too easily. But the longer I stayed quiet, the more the truth began to surface in ways I hadn't anticipated. It started with a conversation over coffee. A mutual friend, someone I hadn't seen much lately, hesitated over her latte, glancing around the cafe before leaning in closer. "I don't know if it's my place," she said carefully, "but you deserve to know he hasn't exactly been subtle when you're not around." She didn't have proof. Not tangible, screenshot-worthy evidence. Just observations. Moments at parties. Rumors whispered between colleagues. Stories about Nathan's attention drifting where it shouldn't have. I listened without interrupting, without betraying the fact that I already knew more than she could imagine. Another friend reached out a few days later. A different story. The same undertone. A conversation caught between two acquaintances. A photo someone had posted and quickly deleted. A name dropped casually in a conversation Nathan claimed he never had. Piece by piece, the mosaic came together. They hadn't told me before because they hadn't wanted to interfere. Because Nathan was charming. Because it was easier to assume things weren't as bad as they looked. And maybe I would have thought the same if I hadn't already seen behind the curtain myself. I didn't blame them. Sometimes the truth is too uncomfortable to name, until someone else is willing to say it out loud. The important thing was that I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. Nathan had built his second life with the same recklessness he had used to charm people into believing the first one was real. And now, the witnesses were stepping out of the shadows, not to attack him, but simply to tell the truth. Quietly. Honestly. The way truth always does when you finally stop trying to protect what isn't real. Once I stopped pretending it was a mistake, everything made sense. Nathan wasn't clumsy. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't some overwhelmed man who had stumbled into bad decisions he regretted. He was deliberate. Every message, every dinner, every carefully worded text was part of a system he had perfected. A system built not on connection, but on performance. He knew how to say just enough to keep people hooked without offering anything real. Knew how to flirt just enough to make someone feel special without crossing the lines that could get him caught. At least not immediately. Attention was his currency. He didn't need deep bonds. He needed adoration. Constant reminders that he was wanted, admired, envied. And when that validation faded, as it always does when real life sets in, he chased the next high. A new conversation. A new admirer. A new stage to perform on. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't even about romance. It was about feeding the hollowness he refused to face. About convincing himself, for a few more hours, that he was bigger than the emptiness waiting for him when the lights went down. Realizing that didn't make me feel better. It didn't soften the betrayal, but it clarified the battlefield. I wasn't competing with another woman. I was competing with an endless need he had no intention of ever giving up. And that was a game I was never going to win, because it wasn't winnable. Not by me. Not by anyone. That understanding didn't bring rage. It brought peace. Because once you realize you were never fighting for something real, you stop feeling responsible for losing it. Nathan hadn't betrayed me because I lacked something. He had betrayed me because he lacked everything he pretended to offer. And now that I saw the truth clearly, I knew what had to come next. Not confrontation. Not demands. Just the simple, steady dismantling of the story he had built around himself. And when the collapse came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be inevitable. The withdrawal wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing you could see all at once, the way a building crumbles after a wrecking ball. It was quieter than that. A slow, deliberate shifting of weight, a careful unhooking of my life from his. I stopped initiating plans, stopped reminding him of important dates, stopped filling the silences he once expected me to smooth over without question. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. Or maybe he did notice, but chose to pretend he didn't. The same way he had chosen to pretend that building a second life behind my back was harmless. I moved my money into a separate account, changed passwords, started gathering my important documents, not in a flurry of panic, but with a quiet, methodical certainty. I reconnected with friends I had let drift away, not with grand apologies, but with small gestures, a coffee here, a text there, slowly stitching myself back into a community that didn't revolve around Nathan's carefully curated image. At work, I took on new projects, volunteered for conferences, strengthened the foundation of a future that wouldn't need his approval or presence to feel steady. I even started looking at new places to live, places that didn't carry the echo of his voice down the hallways, places where I could build something new without having to tear down what remained of us first. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making him pay. It was about reclaiming what I had given so freely for so long. My time, my trust, my belief in a future he had never truly been building with me. And as I quietly stepped back, leaving fewer and fewer pieces of myself exposed to his carelessness, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not loud, not showy. Just the steady, unshakable kind. That comes from knowing you no longer have to beg for what you deserve. You simply choose it for yourself, and walk toward it without looking back. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Nathan's company was hosting a major end-of-year gala, an event he had been hyping up for weeks. Black tie. Big names. A room full of people he desperately wanted to impress. It was the kind of stage he lived for. The kind of night he imagined would cement his place among the people he admired. Successful, admired, untouchable. He begged me to come. Said it would mean the world to have me by his side. Said it would look good for us to attend together. A polished, picture-perfect couple, smiling under chandeliers and flashing cameras. I agreed, smiling politely, letting him believe one last time that the world was still spinning exactly the way he wanted it to. What he didn't know was that by the time we stepped onto that red carpet, the seams of his double life were already beginning to show. The conversations had already started, small, uncertain at first, then louder, more direct. Mutual friends, co-workers, acquaintances, people who had seen too much, heard too much, noticed the patterns he thought he had hidden. I didn't have to say a word. All I had done was plant a few seeds, quietly, carefully, handing over small truths to the right people in the right moments. A screenshot here, an overheard story there. No embellishment, no anger, just the truth, laid out in pieces too undeniable to ignore. The rest unfolded naturally. The same way a thread, once pulled, unravels an entire garment without force. Nathan had built his life on the assumption that no one would ever pull too hard, that the shine he wrapped around himself would blind people long enough for him to stay ahead of the fallout. But attention is a fragile thing. It turns quickly, and the night he thought would be his crowning achievement was already poised to become something else entirely. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a confrontation. I just needed to walk into that room, head high, shoulders back, and let the truth do what it always does when you finally stop hiding it. Set everything else on fire. The night of the gala was almost too perfect. Nathan was in his element, laughing, shaking hands, posing for photos with a practiced ease that made it easy to forget how hollow it all really was. He kept glancing over at me, offering proud smiles, as if he believed my presence validated everything he had built. And I smiled back, polite, composed, the picture of the supportive girlfriend he still thought he had. But under the surface, the cracks were widening. Small things at first. A woman approaching him a little too warmly, her eyes flickering to me and then quickly away. A colleague pulling him aside, voice low, expression serious. Before Nathan plastered on a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't have to orchestrate anything. I didn't have to shout or point or make a scene. The match had already been dropped. And now the fire was catching. Slow but inevitable. People whispered behind their hands. Phones buzzed with messages passed under tables. Expressions shifted as private knowledge became public rumor. Nathan tried to hold it together, tried to keep smiling, tried to stay charming, tried to act like nothing was wrong. But you can't charm your way out of a truth everyone has already started to believe. The room, once so warm to him, began to cool. Conversations he tried to join thinned out. Photographers stopped calling his name. And through it all, I stayed steady. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or yell or make myself a spectacle. I simply stood there, the calm center of a storm he had summoned with his own hands. When he finally made his way back to me, face pale under the ballroom lights, searching for some kind of anchor, I met his eyes and smiled gently. Not with malice, not with triumph, just the quiet, steady understanding that everything he had built on lies was crumbling now. And there was nothing he could do to stop it, because the truth, once free, doesn't need anyone to fight for it. It burns all on its own. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow, methodical, the way a building gives way long after the first cracks have appeared. By the following week, the rumors that started at the gala had found their way into boardrooms, into client meetings, into the quiet conversations between people who had once cheered for Nathan's success. Questions were asked, not directly to him, at least not at first, but to each other. Soft, skeptical questions about his late-night meetings, his relationships with certain clients, his reputation for being a little too friendly in settings that demanded more professionalism. The executive team, who once championed him so loudly, suddenly grew silent. Meetings were rescheduled. Opportunities quietly shifted to other faces. The awards he had once been a favorite to receive went to safer, steadier candidates. People who didn't carry the scent of scandal, even if it was still just rumor. Nathan tried to recover. He tried to work harder, smile brighter, promise bigger. But you can't rebuild trust when people have already decided it's safer to look elsewhere. And trust, once lost, isn't earned back by force. It's surrendered. I watched from a distance as he scrambled, reaching out to contacts who suddenly forgot to return his calls, offering reassurances to friends who nodded politely but no longer invited him to their tables. The man who once moved so easily through every room now stumbled at every turn. There were no grand accusations, no formal charges, just the slow withdrawal of faith, of goodwill, of the benefit of the doubt he had counted on for so long. And beneath it all, he knew the applause he once lived for was gone, replaced by something colder, something heavier. He had betrayed not just me, but the image he had spent so long trying to project. And now the world he built on admiration was collapsing quietly under its own weight. Exactly the way he built it, exactly the way it deserved to fall. When the time came to leave, there was no dramatic conversation, no final argument, no tearful promises to change. Nathan must have known it was coming, even if he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. I packed my things slowly, methodically, without rushing. There was no need for chaos. I didn't want reminders, didn't want keepsakes, didn't want pieces of a life that had been built on half-truths and hollow promises. Everything I took was mine, the things he hadn't touched, the things he hadn't tainted. The apartment looked almost the same when I finished, but it felt different, like a stage abandoned after the show has ended. The lights still warm, but the magic long gone. Nathan came home late that night, his tie loosened, his face drawn tight with a kind of desperation he didn't bother to hide anymore. He saw the suitcase by the door. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, maybe just to ask what took me so long. I didn't give him the chance. "I know everything," I said quietly. Nothing more, because there was nothing more to say. He didn't deny it. He didn't fall to his knees or beg. He just stood there, watching as the life he had stitched together with lies finally came undone in front of him. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't ask for explanations that would have only been more carefully packaged lies. I simply picked up my suitcase, opened the door, and stepped out into the night air. The world outside was crisp and cool, the kind of evening that smelled like new beginnings. I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left to see, the ashes of what we had burned quietly behind me. And for the first time in a long time, I was walking towards something real, something entirely my own. Starting over wasn't a grand gesture. It was a series of small decisions, made quietly, each one a thread weaving a life that no longer had room for him. I found a new place, smaller, simpler, but entirely mine. No photos of a life staged for others. No furniture chosen to impress. Just spaces filled with things that made me feel peaceful, safe, at home. I changed my routines, took different routes to work, found new coffee shops, New parks. New corners of the city that didn't carry the echo of his laughter. I reconnected with friends I hadn't realized I missed so much. The ones who loved me without condition, who never needed me to perform or prove my worth. We talked for hours, not about Nathan, but about books and dreams and silly memories that had nothing to do with the life I had left behind. I poured myself into work, not as a distraction, but as a reclamation. The projects I once felt too small to lead, I took head-on. The opportunities one once thought I wasn't ready for, I claimed without hesitation. And slowly, steadily, the guilt and shame and sadness that had clung to me after the betrayal began to loosen their grip. There were hard days, of course. Mornings when the quiet felt too loud. Nights when I wondered if it had been foolish to believe in someone so completely. But those moments passed. Because every day I woke up in a space that was entirely my own. Every time I made a decision without weighing how it would look to someone else. I grew stronger. I wasn't rebuilding from ruins. I was building from truth. From clarity. From the steady understanding that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing not to let it define the future. Nathan was a chapter. Nothing more. And the story I was writing now had nothing to do with him. It was mine. All mine. I didn't go looking for updates on Nathan. I didn't check his profiles. Didn't ask mutual friends what he was doing. Didn't waste my time wondering how he was handling the fallout. But sometimes the universe delivers news you're no longer asking for. Little things. Offhand comments from acquaintances. Whispers carried through the edges of conversations I wasn't even part of anymore. The picture that emerged wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some spectacular collapse. The kind you might see in a movie. It was slower. Quieter. The way relevance fades from a person who spent too long chasing attention and forgot how to build anything real. Nathan's professional opportunities dried up first. Companies that once sought him out moved on to safer, steadier choices. Partnerships he thought were locked in quietly dissolved. Invitations to events, once steady and reliable, stopped arriving. He tried, of course. Tried to rebrand. Tried to spin the story. Tried to claw his way back onto the stage he had once commanded so easily. But you can't charm people forever, especially when the whispers grow louder than the applause. Socially, the distance grew too. Friends who once orbited him like satellites found new centers of gravity. Not out of malice, just out of necessity. People sense instability. They back away from it instinctively. And Nathan, for all his polish, couldn't hide the cracks anymore. Meanwhile, my world expanded. New friendships. New projects. New opportunities that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the woman I had become. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in growth. In how far I had traveled without even needing to look over my shoulder. He stayed stuck, still chasing applause. And I kept moving forward, building a life so full, so real, that the idea of ever needing his validation again felt almost laughable. He had been my storm once, but now he was just a shadow, shrinking in the light of a future he could never touch. There was a time when I thought closure would come from confrontation, from standing in front of him, laying out every betrayal, demanding an apology he could never give honestly. But now, standing fully in the life I had rebuilt, I understood something simpler, something truer. Closure had never been about him. It had always been about me. It was in the mornings I woke up without second-guessing my worth. In the evenings filled with laughter and real conversations, unclouded by half-truths or hidden motives. It was in the work I poured myself into, the friendships I tended like gardens, the quiet contentment that filled spaces once dominated by doubt. Nathan's downfall had nothing to do with me anymore. His need for attention, his reckless hunger for admiration, those were battles he would have to fight long after I was gone. I didn't need to see him stumble. I didn't need to hear his regrets. The real victory was never about watching him fall. It was about choosing to rise, choosing to believe in a life where I didn't have to fight to be seen, where my worth wasn't measured by the attention I could command, but by the peace I built day by my own hands. Some betrayals don't end with explosions. They end with silence, with distance, with the simple act of refusing to carry someone else's brokenness any further. Nathan was a lesson, sharp, painful, necessary, not because he defined me, but because surviving him taught me who I would never become. I would never beg for love, never barter my soul for a few moments of spotlight, never mistake admiration for connection again. The final word wasn't spoken to him. It was whispered to myself, late at night, in a life that was fully mine. I survived. I grew. I thrived. And he he became nothing more than a story I stopped telling a long time ago.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.